වීඩියෝ ඇමතුම්ද සමග මැසෙන්ජර් සේවාවන් රැසකට සහ POTV Go සඳහා නොමිලේ ඩේටා ශ්‍රී ලංකා ටෙලිකොම්.
ලෙන්ගතුකම වැඩි කරගන්න ලව්ජි රුපියල් 50ට අඩු කළා.
මාමේ එන්න අපිට එකක් බොමු.
In your headlines tonight, sweeping it under the carpet, Archbishop of Colombo calls out former government on Easter attack culpability as the country commemorates the fallen.
We are aggrieved that those responsible for governance did not take seriously the repeated warning and so allowed this massacre to take place, but also sought to hide their culpability.
Safe and sound, more Sri Lankan students return home as recovery rate rises to 1 in 3 patients. Dampened spirits. Government orders closure of liquor stores as pandemonium witnessed at outlets. Easter attacks revisited. An year on since the attacks, Sri Lanka's foremost international terrorism expert analyzes the country's response to the spate of terror, while the priest who witnessed it firsthand recollects the events of that fateful day. All this and much more coming up tonight on First at 9, this Tuesday, the 21st of April 2020.
6997ට SMS කර රුපියල් මිලියන 3ක මුල්තැන්ගේ උපකරණ දිනාගෙන අවුරුද්දෙම කුස්සිය ටයිම් සේව් කරගන්න.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
The concept of faith means one thing to you and another to me, and it carries different meaning to each and every individual. Faith relies on not just religion, but it is also influenced by culture and tradition. Whatever one's religious domination may be, the core essence of religion is peace, love, harmony and coexistence. This day last year, Sri Lanka faced a new threat, taking the country by shock. A massacre in the name of faith and religion. Religious extremism had well and truly arrived in Sri Lanka. Lives were lost, families torn apart, and communities left seeking answers. The acts of brutality can be forgiven, but the victims and those affected by the spate of terror will forever be remembered.
Exactly 1 year ago, on what was expected to be a day of celebration and renewal for the country's Christian community, terror struck. At 8:45 a.m., 2 suicide bombers simultaneously detonated explosive-laden backpacks inside at the shrine of St. Anthony's in Kochikade, Colombo, and at the St. Sebastian's shrine in Katuapitiya, Negombo. What followed next were more blasts, this time at the Kingsbury and Shangri-La hotels in Colombo, the Zion Church in Batticaloa, and the Cinnamon Grand Hotel. 2 more indirect detonations happened later on in the day, one at the Tropical Inn guest house in the Dehiwala suburb of Colombo, and another at the Dematagoda residence of one of the attackers as the pregnant wife of the Shangri-La bomber detonated an explosive device as police moved in a few hours later. The blast killed 3 police officers, including the bomber, and hurt 3 children. In the end, the series of bombings resulted in the total deaths of 269 Sri Lankans and foreigners, both Christians and people of other faiths. However, subsequent discoveries of more improvised explosive devices throughout the city, targeting vital infrastructure and first responders to the attack sites, show that it could have been much higher. One bomb was found by Sri Lankan Air Force personnel and another large device was found in the van parked outside the St. Anthony's Shrine the next day. The device appeared to have been a secondary explosive aimed at emergency staff and volunteers assisting the dead and wounded, a calling card of radical Islamic extremists throughout the world. With the country currently facing a massive threat from the COVID-19 global pandemic and curfews keeping people at home, commemorations were limited to private solemn reflection, as large gatherings have been deemed a public health risk. Archbishop of Colombo, His Eminence Malcolm Cardinal Ranjith, called on all Sri Lankans to observe 2 minutes silence at 8:45 a.m. and offer prayer to the souls of the departed and those who continue to struggle to come to terms with their injuries and the loss of loved ones. Accordingly, the entire country came to a standstill this morning as people of all faiths joined in solidarity. The Cardinal presided over a special Mass today at the Bishop's House in Colombo, sans a congregation. Later, in his commemorative message, paid tribute to those who stood by the victims in the aftermath of the attacks and at the same time criticised the government officials for not taking seriously the repeated warnings received that allowed the attacks to take place. The Cardinal also condemned what he termed attempts by officials to hide their culpability for the failures that caused such death and destruction.
On Easter Sunday, our churches, hotels were attacked by a group of terrorists. Hundreds of people were killed, people belonging to all the communities of Sri Lanka. It was, as you know, a serious provocation against peace and harmony in our country. Those who perpetrated this heinous act wanted racial riots, religious riots in this country. By working together as brothers and sisters of one country, we prevented that serious situation. We honor very specially all those who lost their lives, those who were seriously injured, who lost their loved ones. We are grateful to those friendly nations that generously shared their intelligence information prior to the attack on several occasions. We are aggrieved that those responsible for governance at that time did not take seriously the repeated warnings and so not only allowed this massacre to take place but also sought to hide their culpability after the attack. Still more serious is the responsibility of all those who masterminded these attacks by planning, funding and encouraging and deliberately covering up the facts of the case. We thank the incumbent president for his insistence in investigating these attacks thoroughly and for ensuring that those who are responsible are brought to book. We are indeed sad and shocked to hear that some educated and elitist people, some of whom are connected to the legal profession, are trying to bring pressure on the president to cover up these investigations and possibly hide the authors. What are human rights when they try to use such to cover up the perpetrators and associates of those who violated the basic right to life of so many innocent human beings, men, women and children? We also wish to affirm our confidence in the Presidential Commission of Inquiry appointed to investigate these events, and we are hopeful that we will be able to ascertain who orchestrated these attacks and who was behind it, as well as who shirked their responsibility to prevent them when they knew about it.
The question, however, being asked by many even today, especially the Christian community, was why and how had we deserved this? Those questions are yet to be answered as investigations continue into determining the true face of Sri Lanka's first Islamic extremists and the ideology that inspired them to perpetrate such an inhumane attack. This year, as the country commemorates the first anniversary of the attacks, revelations of official negligence by key figures in the government and the country's security apparatus have left a bitter aftertaste. According to investigations by the Parliamentary Select Committee probing the attacks, prior intelligence warnings had been received by the government from India's Raw Intelligence Service on the 4th of April 2019, almost 3 weeks before the attacks, which listed out names of the attackers, targets, dates and times. No action, however, was taken from the very highest levels of power right down the line. On the 4th of April 2019, Director of State Intelligence Service Nilantha Jayawardena received the first intelligence report of a potential attack via WhatsApp message from an unnamed source. Following this, Jayawardena had also received similar information in writing on the 5th of April, which resulted in a meeting being held between SIS officials where the information was discussed. On the 7th of April, this information was shared with the country's Chief of National Intelligence, Sisira Mendis. On the 8th of April, the SIS director then shares the intelligence warning with Defence Secretary Hemasiri Fernando, who is advised to alert the Inspector General of Police, Pujit Jayasundara. On the 9th of April, 5 days after the first inkling of an attack was received, an intelligence coordination meeting was held, chaired by Defence Secretary Hemisri Fernando and attended by heads of the tri-forces and investigative agencies. However, the Parliamentary Select Committee report highlights the fact that at the meeting, SIS Director Jayawardena did not brief attendees of the intelligence received and only promised to share a special report with the IGP and the Criminal Investigation Department. Army Commander at the time, General Mahesh Senanayake, was to later tell the Parliamentary Select Committee that he only received the intel report after the attacks. Meanwhile, the same day, SIS Director Jayawardena forwarded to the IGP, the CNI and CID a letter marked Top Secret, providing information that Zahran Hashim of the National Tawhid Jamaat and his associates were planning to carry out a suicide attack in Sri Lanka and that they were to target churches. The next day, the 10th of April, the Director of Terrorism Investigation Division, upon receiving the intel report, ordered the arrest of Zahran Hashim and the others named. This arrest order resulted in a special operation launched from the 4th to the 16th April to track down the attack mastermind. Meanwhile, on the 17th April, the SIS Director is informed of a motorcycle explosion in Kattankudy on the east coast, which on the 18th is linked to Zahran Hashim, and a special report is sent to the IGP and CID, calling it a dry run for an attack. The Army Intelligence is only informed on the 19th of April, with the SIS Director telling the Director of Military Intelligence that, quote, "There is an incident like this. You have to act fast. Tell your people," unquote. On the 20th of April, just a day before the attacks, the SIS Director receives a WhatsApp warning from his confidential source saying, quote, "Zahran Hashim of NTJ of Sri Lanka and his associates have a plan to carry out an itishat or suicide attack in Sri Lanka. It is further learnt that they have conducted a dry run." The conversation continues with the source revealing further details, saying it is learnt that they are likely to carry out their attack in Sri Lanka at any time on or before the 21st of April 2019. They have reported the selected 8 places, including a church and a hotel, where Indians inhabiting a large number. Further details awaited, unquote. The SIS Director later told the Parliamentary Select Committee that the message was forwarded to the Ministry of Defence, the IGP and the CNI and requested them to follow up on the warning. He also claimed to have informed the Police Special Task Force on the day. On the 21st of April at 8:27 a.m, mere minutes before the bombs detonated, the SIS Director receives a chilling message, again from his source, warning of attacks between 6 a.m. and 10 a.m. and revealing one of the targets as a Methodist church. The SIS Director had then informed the IGP and the Defence Secretary of the new information by 8:32 a.m, according to the PSC report. The first bomb went off at St Anthony's Church, Kochikade, 12 minutes later at 8:45 a.m. Meanwhile, President Gotabaya Rajapaksa, in a special message released today, vowed to ensure the safety of all communities in the country and not to leave any room for any form of extremism or violence from any extremists to be unleashed on the people again. The President also assured to identify and bring to justice the true perpetrators responsible for the Easter Sunday attacks and blamed the dismantling of the country's security mechanism, leading to a state of anarchy prevailing at the time, which allowed extremism, terrorism and all kinds of violence to raise its head. Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa, meanwhile, in his message, called the attacks one of the biggest attacks on civilians in the world and highlighted the security failings that, if acted upon, could have prevented the attacks from happening.
The extremist attacks shook Sri Lanka to its core when the country stood about a month away from marking the 10th year since eliminating terrorism. In the immediate aftermath, the Sri Lankan military accused that its once powerful intelligence sector was weakened, destabilizing the entire security apparatus. I have invited to join us live via video conferencing Sri Lanka's foremost international terrorism expert, Professor Rohan Gunaratne. Let me invite you and warmly welcome you to our studios. Thank you for joining us, Professor Rohan. I had the pleasure of interviewing you that fateful day to discuss and analyze the situation from your perspective. And also in studio, I've invited Father Joy Mariaratnam, parish priest of St. Sebastian's Church in Hasdorf, who had conducted the Mass at St. Anthony's Church that morning at 8:45 a.m. Father Joy, good evening and thank you for joining us.
Good evening. Thank you for inviting me.
I think I'd like to start off talking to you. I know we had a recollection of the Easter attacks, but you witnessed the attacks at the St. Anthony's Shrine in Kochikade at 8:45 a.m. Let's very quickly recollect your memory of the event and talk a little about how it feels an year on.
Actually, that is the most joyful occasion for any Christian. That day when I went for the Mass at St. Anthony's Shrine at 8 o'clock in the morning, I was full of happiness because I am going to celebrate one of the most important celebrations in the Catholic Church. And it is going to be a celebration at St. Anthony's Shrine, Kochikade. Having Mass at Kochikade is a special blessing a priest can have. It's a unique shrine where people from different faith come there. So I went there. As I entered the church, I still remember very clearly the joy in the faces of the people. For example, I met a child, and child was sharing with me the joy. She was showing her dress. She was wearing a new one. And the mother who was standing by, she was telling, today we are having a special celebration. I have a special reason to thank God for all the blessings that she has received and all that. We started the Mass at 8 o'clock with a lot of joy, expectation of God's blessing. Mass went on very well till the fourth prayer of the faithful. The joy completely shattered. We lost everything like. I heard a blast with a fireball. Everything became dark, as if the lives of the people have become dark. I was motionless. I did not know what to do. I was frightened, to be very honest, terribly frightened. I did not know what to do next. But still I took little courage and took few steps forward towards the congregation. I could not go further. I could see bloodstains, pieces of flesh, and people dead. Even the child who was telling, I am wearing a new dress today because I am going to celebrate, she was no more.
A fateful day, and we're thankful that you survived unharmed. The victims and the affected, as I said, will be remembered and respected today and forever. Professor Rohan Gunaratna, I'd like to turn to you, Professor. We spoke right after the Easter attacks a year ago, and you did analyze the situation. You've interviewed ISIS, Al-Qaeda fighters, and you've researched, you've written, authored books, and you've specifically mentioned that a rehabilitation program similar to what Sri Lanka carried out post-war should be implemented, and also in terms of the legal framework, what needs to be rectified. You said Sri Lanka needs to pass National Security Act, maintenance of ethnic and religious harmony to ensure through this act, regulation of cyberspace, radical preachers should be screened, and also that Sri Lanka should make sure that these preachers are certified, and national schools should be revisited, and this structure should be changed, and also a robust law that criminalizes incitement to violence and hatred. And year on, what is your analysis, Professor? We are in the midst of a global pandemic. Sri Lanka is fighting this pandemic along with the rest of the world. But here too, we see certain incidents of hate speech turning into violence, certain people playing into the agenda of others. But yet, an year on, haven't we learnt our lesson?
Sri Lanka has exceptionally well to contain the threat posed by the Islamic State. There are two areas that requires revisiting, and that is to develop a legal and a policy framework that will criminalize hate speech leading to violence, and also a separate legislation focusing on fake news, that is online manipulation, online falsehoods and manipulation. These two bills are essential. Other than that, the terrorist group known as the Islamic State, group known as ISIS, should be designated or proscribed or criminalized. Unfortunately, the previous regime did not do that. And when Parliament convenes, this is something the current president should do as a priority. But I want to tell you that since the new government came to power, they have made remarkable strides against the Islamic State in containing the threat. But there are other things that needs to be done. For example, we have to build a national education policy and a plan. Our schools are not properly integrating the Sinhalese, Tamils and the Muslims. If we want a harmonious Sri Lanka, the time is right for us to create those national schools. We should have no school that is just dedicated to one particular ethnicity or religion. If we want Sri Lankans, then our schools should cater to all the communities. And this is one of the most important elements for us to build stability and security in the future.
But an year on, we have failed to take certain measures, concrete measures, in order to ensure certain areas that you spoke about last year is dealt with. How do you look at the threat per se, Professor?
The threat posed by the Islamic State has increased exponentially in the South Asian region. Just last week, 7 boats, including a police boat, was burnt in the Maldives by the Islamic State terrorists, and the attack was claimed by the Islamic State in Syria and Iraq. Similarly, we have seen Islamic State attacks in India, in Pakistan, in Afghanistan and Bangladesh. So this is a threat. The threat of Islamic State is a growing threat in this region, and Sri Lanka should continue to work with countries in the region to build common databases, exchange personnel, conduct joint training, joint operations, share information, intelligence, share experience, expertise and resources. So we need to do a lot more on the regional front. But domestically, since this government came to power, they have done a lot. In fact, the Criminal Investigations Department, they have done a remarkable job to investigate. The SIS, the State Intelligence Service, the Directorate, Military Intelligence, both these premier services have now started to operate to collect information and intelligence on these groups. So I want to share with you that on the national security front, Sri Lankans are much safer than what they were during the previous regime.
I'd like to turn to Father Joy. I think we heard the Cardinal's message, Archbishop His Eminence Malcolm Cardinal Ranjit, and we're still talking about justice. You were there that fateful morning at 8:45 a.m. at the St. Anthony's Shrine. Let's look forward. The event, the brutality, we said, will be forgiven. But where do we go from here?
I do totally agree with His Eminence Cardinal. We have to forgive. Because we are the followers of Christ. We are trying to live the message of Christ. We have to forgive. We do not want to blame. That's what Cardinal was telling. And I would like to tell here, forgiving does not mean forgetting. We don't want to forget that incident. the brutality. We will remember that. What do I mean by that we would remember? Not to remember with anger, not to remember with vengeance, but we will remember it so that we will know the pain of it and we will stand against such things happening. So the people of different faith, people who speak different languages should remember it because of the brutality, and we have to join hands together so that such things are not repeated. At the same time, we have to remember also with gratitude the people who stood by us at that time. At that moment, I would say, though we are pointing at certain people that they were the one who did it, but people of that faith also were there to help the people who were injured. We could stand together in time of need, in time of difficulties. So we have to remember that as well.
Professor Rohan Gunaratna and Father Joy Mariaratnam, finally I'd like to very quickly ask both of you, religious leaders and the community as a whole, we all have a responsibility here in order to ensure that a continuity, a reoccurrence of events as this. Sri Lanka does not see this again. Very quickly, if we add your final remarks. Professor Gunaratna?
His Eminence, the Cardinal was both the President and Prime Minister when the Easter Sunday attacks took place, because he told the Catholics, do not attack the Muslims, and he calmed the ground. And today I would like to see religious leaders playing the same role to build harmony between religious and ethnic groups. So the religious leaders should come to the fore, create harmony centers in every district and work very closely to break the radicalization pipeline. That is, the imminent terrorist threat is over, but the pipeline that produced Zaharan and his followers, they are still intact. And that is why it is so important for the Muslim leaders to work with government, work with other religious leaders to reform the institutions so that we will have peace and harmony in this country. Otherwise, every few years, we will witness a terrorist attack.
Thank you very much for those thoughts. Father Joy, I think you'd have something to add very quickly before we go in for a short break.
Professor Rohan rightly said, it is a duty of every religious leader to teach the people not to become so fundamentalist. Every religious leader must teach their people to respect the differences, to appreciate the uniqueness of every religion. If you are able to do that one, Cardinal does it very well. And if every religious leader were to do that one, I am sure we can enjoy harmony and peace in our country.
Thank you very much, Father Joy Mariaratnam, the parish priest of the Halstorf Church, as well as Professor Rohan Gunaratna, Sri Lanka's foremost expert in terrorism, who's internationally known, who has authored several books on the ISIS and Al-Qaeda movements. We'll take a short commercial break here on First at 9.
නිෂ්පාදිත දිනය කවදත් අලුත් වටවල තේ අරගන්න.
වටවල තේ ශ්‍රී ලංකාවේ තේ එක.
Welcome back live from Studios 24. This is First at 9. The number of Sri Lankan recoveries rose by 4 today, taking the country's overall recovery rate to 33%, meaning that 1 in 3 patients are showing full recovery. However, 6 more patients were added to Sri Lanka's total, with 5 of them reported from the latest COVID-19 hotspot, Bandaranaike Mawatha in Colombo 12. Sri Lanka, in the meantime, took measures to repatriate 113 students who were stranded in Pakistan and transported them to quarantine centres for a mandatory 14-day stay.
5 COVID-19 positive patients were identified this morning from Bandaranaike Mawatha in Colombo 12. With around 52 patients already discovered in the area, the Army today took measures to send 242 families residing in the area into quarantine centres today.
ඊයේ දිනේ සහ අද්දෑසන කෙසෙල්වත්ත ප්‍රදේශයෙන් COVID-19 වෛරසය ආසාදිත වූ සංඛ්‍යාවන් වැඩිවීමත් සමග එම ප්‍රදේශයේ 242 දෙනෙකු ඊයේ දිනේදී නිරෝධායන මධ්‍යස්ථානයට රැගෙන ගියා. ඊට අමතරව අද දිනේදී පවුල් 242කට අයත් 1010ක් වූ සංඛ්‍යාවක් යුද හමුදාවේ නිරෝධායන කඳුරු 3ක් වෙත ඔවුන් අද දිනේදී රැගෙන යනු ලැබුවා.
In the meantime, 2 persons are suspected of having contracted the COVID-19 virus after reportedly visiting the residence of a female at Bandaranaike Mawatha in Kesalbatta, who had later tested positive for the virus. The woman had been visited by her brother, his wife and their 4-month-old child during the time the curfew had been in effect, and the woman was only diagnosed as a COVID-19 patient after the couple's visit 2 days later. After the wife and the child had shown symptoms of the virus last night, public health inspectors in the area had then visited the house and admitted the family to the base hospital in Homagama. One of the last patients added to the country's total reported yesterday was a 33-year-old who was engaged in the fisheries trade and was a resident of Piliyandala. The person has been admitted to the Kothalawala Defence Medical Faculty Hospital following the onset of coronavirus symptoms and was transferred to the Infectious Diseases Hospital upon confirming that he was a COVID-19 patient. Further, as the man had visited the Padigoda fish market, public health inspectors have taken steps to subject all vendors at the market to PCR tests. In the meantime, a special mission was implemented to repatriate Sri Lankan students unable to return to the country due to the suspension of flights across the world. Under the program, a batch of 113 Sri Lankan students stranded in Lahore and Karachi were repatriated earlier this evening and have been sent to quarantine centres as per the directives of health authorities. Accordingly, today the number of COVID-19 cases reported rose by 6, with 4 recoveries as well. Thereby, Sri Lanka's recovery rate was reported at 33%, while active cases were seen at 201.
කොරෝනා වෛරසය පැතිරීම වළක්වන්න සබන් යොදා දෑත් සෝදන්න.
The country once more saw curfew being lifted in 21 districts for 15 hours today, with the exception of Colombo, Gampaha, Kaluthara and Puttlam districts. For a second consecutive day, authorities had to intervene to ensure that people adhere to social distancing protocols. Another notable development of the day was the government's reversal of the decision to let liquor stores do business during non-curfew hours.
The curfew was once more lifted at 5 a.m. today in 21 districts across the country, with Colombo, Kaluthara, Gampaha and Puttlam still under lockdown. Health authorities and security units had informed the public to adhere to social distancing and health protocols, including the use of face masks during the window of free movement. Looking at the conduct of people at the weekly market in Hemmatagama, it appears that those cautions may well have fallen on deaf ears. What's more, public health inspectors had to give strict advice to passengers who boarded buses disregarding government directives. Meanwhile, the government today reversed its decision to let liquor stores do business during non-curfew hours, ordering an immediate closure of all liquor stores until further notice. Some outlets, however, could not close immediately, owing to the considerable number of consumers converging in expectation of purchasing liquor. This meant the police having to intervene in closing liquor stores. Elsewhere in Mattakulia, a protest was worked off, alleging that the government's 5,000 rupee relief allowance was not received. In the meantime, the Department of Posts, with the cooperation of the acting IGP, has taken measures to grant a grace period for traffic fine payments sans an additional penalty charge. Accordingly, traffic fines issued on or after the 1st of March can be paid without incurring an additional charge at any post office or sub-post office until the 2nd of May. What's more, traffic fines issued from the 16th to the 29th of February can be paid with the accepted additional penalty charge until the 2nd of May. As for the payments of traffic fines in the districts of Colombo, Kaluthara, Gampaha and Puttlam, a grace period will be announced when the post offices reopen. In the meantime, another 32 million rupees have been donated to the COVID-19 Healthcare and Social Security Fund, boosting its balance to 769 million rupees. The President's Media Division said that among the donors are the Chief Prelate in Singapore, Venerable Billangwila Dhammaratana Thera, who donated 5 million rupees. Chief Prelate in USA, Venerable Maharagama Dhammasiri Thera, has also made a contribution of 5 million rupees to the fund. Sri Lanka Vehicle Importers Association too had made a donation to the fund, and the cheque for 10 million rupees was handed over to Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa. Meanwhile, President Gotabaya Rajapaksa has instructed ministerial secretaries and institutional heads to ensure the continuation of essential services with a minimum staff. During today's discussion, the head of state had impressed upon the importance of resuming development programs such as road construction and laying of water supply lines. President Gotabaya had also instructed the officials to draft plans which will ensure the continuation of essential services in areas which are under indefinite lockdown. He also made evident that transportation of farmers' produce from rural areas to cities by SLTB buses is also a considerable relief to farmers. Collection of bills by post offices, acceptance of bank deposits as well as other possible services were also discussed.
And we take a short commercial break to return soon with more news. Welcome back. US oil prices crashed into the negative territory for the first time in history yesterday due to pandemic-related demand shock and oversupply fears. Now, the West Texas Intermediate for May delivery shed $55.9 to settle at minus $37.63 a barrel on the New York Mercantile Exchange, implying that producers would pay buyers to take oil off their hands. The drop is equivalent to over 305%. It marks the first time an oil futures contract has traded negative in history. The June West Texas Intermediate contract fell more than 18% to $20.43 per barrel. The global benchmark Brent crude for June delivery decreased $2.51 to close at $25.57 a barrel on the London ICE Futures Exchange. Meanwhile, Wall Street's major averages tumbled, with the Dow closing down nearly 600 points. The International Energy Agency warns that global oil demand is expected to fall by a record 9.3 million barrels per day year-on-year in 2020. The IEA said demand in April is estimated to be 29 million barrels per day, lower than a year ago, down to a level last seen in 1995 due to COVID-19, as containment measures have brought mobility almost to a halt. Taking you to Asian shares after U.S. crude futures turned negative, Asian shares today started down, tracking a Wall Street tumble. Japan's benchmark Nikkei 225 opened down 0.96% at 19,479.83 points. Hong Kong's market also opened low, with the benchmark Hang Seng Index dropping to 24,145.68, a loss of 184.34 points. In South Korea, the Korea Composite Stock Price Index opened down 0.48% to 1,889.24 points. The Shanghai Composite Index also started down, dropping 10.31 points at 2,842.42. Virgin Australia has confirmed it has entered voluntary administration, making it Australia's first big corporate casualty of the coronavirus pandemic. The country's second largest carrier cut almost all flights last month following widespread travel bans. It was already struggling with a long-term $5 billion Australian dollars of debt. The airline is now seeking new buyers and investors after failing to get a loan from Australia's government. Virgin Australia Chief Executive said, "Our decision today is about securing the future of Virgin Australia Group and emerging on the other side of COVID-19 crisis," unquote. Meanwhile, Sir Richard Branson, whose Virgin Group is a part owner of Virgin Australia, has offered a Caribbean island as collateral to help get a UK government bailout of Virgin Atlantic. That wraps up tonight's edition of First at 9. Thank you for watching. Good night.